talk about potential updates to clarify some items in Oregon's building performance standard. So I think first we'll just do a quick introduction for the BPS team here. I'll lead off, and then I'll give a brief overview of what what today's presentation is going to cover and kind of the reasons for why we're bringing everyone together today to talk about these. And then Lisa on the team is going to talk about the bulk of the actual content and some of the updates that we're considering. But as far as introductions go for the ODO team, I know I've worked with a lot of the folks on the call already, but I'm Blake Shalide. I manage the Codes and Standards team at the Oregon Department of Energy, and I'll turn it over to Lisa for an introduction.
Hi, I'm Lisa Gartland, and I'm a facilities engineer here at Codes and Standards.
And I'll just let the ODO team jump in.
Hi, I'm Madeline O'Dwyer, an operations and policy analyst, and I work with the rest of this wonderful team.
I'm Andrew Johnson, and I'm an analyst with the BPS team.
Hi, Ken Davies, program analyst with the team.
I'm Judy Stockwell, and I'm the public assistant for the Codes and Standards team.
I'm Jennifer, the division assistant who assists the building performance standard team.
Thanks, everyone. Is there any other ODO staff that are on the call that didn't get a chance yet to introduce themselves? Okay. Well, if everyone else that's on the call can just kind of introduce yourselves in the chat, I think that would be great, who you are and who you're with. That way we've got a good record of who all's here. But to kind of kick off the meeting, so that's our Codes and Standards team. I think most folks have had a chance to interact with one or all of the folks on our team, but if you haven't already, here's kind of an overview of each of our respective roles within our Codes and Standards team, and specifically with the Building Performance Standards program. So hopefully everyone gets a chance to interact at least at some level with everybody on the team in the near future. So kind of, why do we bring everyone together today? Let's talk about like the Oregon BPS program process. So a lot of folks here were pretty heavily engaged with establishing the comprehensive rulemaking process that went into setting up our Oregon BPS based on ASHRAE Standard 100 that was published at the beginning of the year on January 1st after a comprehensive rulemaking process throughout 2024. So thanks a lot to everyone on the Rulemaking Advisory Committee and the other advisory committee and everyone who commented and was a stakeholder throughout that process. It was a really valuable process where I think we established a really good performance standard for Oregon. As we're going through and refining our covered buildings list, we did a lot of work with counties, mapping all the covered buildings to, in GIS, creating a unique building identifier for each building, and creating an online database through our property inventory portal in order to really build out and get more information about the tens of thousands of buildings that are covered under the building performance standard. We sent out a lot of letters in June. You probably, if you're a building owner, if you work with building owners, that building owner probably received a letter letting them know about the BPS requirements. And we're asking building owners or representatives to log into our property inventory list to give us more information, more contact information, help us refine and get better data on the covered list of buildings. So definitely encourage building owners to log in if they haven't, create an account on the property inventory list, and tell us more about their building so that we can better understand Oregon's building stock. We've been building out detailed program guidance and tools, developing incentive programs, doing a lot of targeted and broad outreach to various covered building groups and building owners that might have a building that's subject to the BPS. And all this kind of leads toward a strong basis for Oregon's BPS. And I think, if you think back to when we finished our rulemaking at the end of last year, I think we all, at least on the ODO side, and I think on the advisory committee side too, and anticipated that there'd most likely be a need to actively monitor our standard for elements that potentially need clarification and refinement to align with the intent of the legislation, the program, and complement all the work that's been done to date. So that's kind of where we are today, with a need to be responsive to different scenarios and questions that we're getting, like as we are actually communicating with these building owners that we sent out letters to clarify things like what tier is my building? I have a mixed use building, how do I consider that? And kind of moving from the dealing with hypothetical scenarios in our rulemaking, where we certainly tried all we could to envision a lot of different covered building scenarios through that. But now we're actually getting feedback on like the real world buildings that are covered under the program. And as a result, identifying the need to clarify a few things within the standard to just provide better direction and transparency for the program. So I mentioned, as we're working with building owners, taking calls, addressing these issues, these are just some of the common themes that seem to be coming up as we interact with our stakeholders here. And one of the main things we're trying to do is just address and provide clarification as the program's ramping up. So compliance periods don't actually begin at the earliest until 2028, but the more clarifications that we can provide now and kind of be proactively responsive, if you will, to make sure that the program's kind of operating as we all intend for it to, and that's all clearly reflected in the language in the standard itself, to make it clear to understand and implement for everybody involved. So I think it's really important that we're really clear as soon as we can regarding things like building tiers, especially for mixed-use buildings, for group buildings, so that building owners can understand and plan for what the requirements are in a few years. So we just want to make sure that we're clarifying what these gray areas are as the program becomes more active, and really especially note that this is not a call to revise the Oregon BPS by any means. We're really kind of taking a surgical approach to clarifying items that need clarification in order to align with the way that we've all been kind of understanding and implementing and going about the program and its intent. So kind of taking a step back there too, as we've gotten these questions in, we've gone back as a staff, as an agency, to make sure that the language in the standard is aligning with all the task force work, the legislative work and intent, and all the process that occurred during the legislative session, all of our stakeholder meetings, our rulemaking advisory committee meetings, our existing rules, the existing standard language as it is. And after a lot of internal work and discussions, we're ready to bring those to our advisory committees here today to kind of talk about what some of those changes are and to seek input and to take some of that guidance. So we've done that thorough review, and now we'll kind of walk through what some of those changes are. So I'll, at this point, turn it over to Lisa to begin to walk through the summary of the proposed updates.
Thank you, Blake. And thanks everybody for tuning in here and paying attention to this program. It's really helpful. Really appreciate your time and effort on all of this. So what we would like to update comes into 5 different areas, mostly about which buildings are covered and what tier they're in. Do they have exemptions? We're just getting a lot of questions about that. And when we go back to standard 100 as it is now, there's just, as we say, some gray areas. So here are the 5, here's a summary of the 5 different areas, but I'm going to get into all of them. I'm not even going to read this to you. We'll just keep going. So next slide, we'll get right into it. So before we get right into it, I'm going to just give you a recap just to get this at the front of your mind, the way that the building performance standard is set up today. So you've probably all seen this diagram on the right of the 2 buildings that illustrate the tier 1 and the tier 2 buildings and the special types of tier 2 buildings. And on the left, we have more of a written description of the tiers. And what we're finding is when we go back to the actual standard language, Oregon Standard 100, the tier definitions don't really correspond to this schematic all the time. There's a few cases in which it's kind of uncertain. So we want to clear that up. Another thing is we're getting a lot of questions about special types of buildings that are very similar to the buildings we've already called out as the tier 2 special buildings. So what do we do with those? And then when we look at various mixed use buildings or how to apply, what buildings can be grouped and why would you group them, the standard is also a little bit less than clear. So that's what we're trying to do. Next slide, clear this stuff up. So why is this important? Well, the tier determination is really important, as probably all of you know, in Oregon Building Performance Standard. The tier 2 buildings, all they have to do is essentially benchmark, find their energy use intensity target, and then find their energy use intensity. But tier 1 buildings have to do more in not just benchmark, they actually also have to submit some kind of O&M plan or energy management plan, or a checklist is the way we're looking at it now for those elements. And if they don't meet their energy use target, if their energy use intensity is too high, then they have to work to reduce their energy use. And that could be a big deal for a lot of buildings. So next. Also, as it stands now, there are various exemptions for buildings, manufacturing or industrial, agricultural, low occupancy or low vacancy, not a whole lot of conditioned floor area, or if they're under financial hardship. Under the current rules, it's pretty explicit in the way these rules are written that they're only for tier 1 buildings. And we are kind of revisiting that. Why only tier 1 buildings? And just to be perfectly clear, I'll always say historic buildings are not exempt, but they can bypass various things that would compromise their integrity. So next. So the first of 5 areas that we're trying to clarify are these special tier 2 building types. So we have directly gotten questions from building facility people who manage prisons. They want to know, hey, is a prison a special tier 2 case or not? So of course we went back through the legislative records. We see where they're included under lodging and residential in the tables at the very end of the Oregon Standard 100. We see that lodging and residential types are also, multifamily and dormitory are also lodging and residential. We feel like prisons are similar to or a subset of the multifamily or dormitory categories. Obviously, they're a little bit different, but we kind of feel like they should be part of the special tier 2 building type. And then we haven't had any questions from anybody who manages a barrack, but barracks are also under lodging and residential, and they're much the same as a dormitory. So we feel like explicitly mapping these in, labeling them as into that special tier 2 building category, whereby they have to be at least 35,000 square feet in gross floor area, and then they can qualify as tier 2. So, and below that they wouldn't qualify. Next. And I don't know if Blake said this, but we're going to take questions at the end of this presentation. And so if you have strong thoughts or opinions or any information that you remember talking about during this whole process of coming up with a standard, put it in the chat. We want your questions. We want your feedback. If you feel that's a great idea, whatever, we want to know, we want to hear. So, and we will get to as many questions as we can once I've gone all the way through this. A lot of these things sort of hang on each other, so you have to sort of go through the whole thing to see the whole picture, which is why. So another special tier 2 building type that we've had a lot of questions on are the residential or senior care home type facilities. There's no mention in the legislative records. Again, they're both included in our tables as building types under consideration. They have energy use intensity target values. They're listed twice, as a matter of fact, under healthcare and again under lodging residential. Once again, we feel that they're very similar to other buildings that are special tier 2, multifamily, dormitory, hospital, sort of a cross between all of those. Therefore, we think that we should also include these as special tier 2 buildings. So why do we want to do this? I'll explain. I know you're saying special tier 2. It's not, we're going to sort of more explicitly define these. Special tier 2 is the tier 2 building types that are explicitly called out and need to be 35,000 square feet or above. So just to clarify that, but we'll get into that more a little bit later. So we would like to allow them to be in that category with hospitals and multifamily and whatever, all those other ones. Next. So to do this, there's a few, like, I don't know, just sort of minor changes that we want to make in this standard. One of them is to call out the additional definitions of building activity types. We have in section 3 of the Oregon Standard 100, there are a whole list of definitions, but we don't have all these definitions for every single building activity type in there. They're just all the way back in table 7-4. And I want to at least call them out here in the definitions section. And another like really kind of minor point is just to say lodging/residential, because that's how they're referred to in all of those tables at the back. So next slide. Another thing we want to do when we're talking about special tier 2 building types and building types in general, we're proposing to update the definition of multifamily. The first part of it is kind of minor. We're changing it from more than 5 to 5 or more dwelling or sleeping units would qualify something as a multifamily building. And that is just to make it consistent with how what we require for utilities in terms of data aggregation. It should be 5 or more for them. So we feel like it should be 5 or more in our definition as well. The thing that might be somewhat controversial, we feel it isn't, but you might disagree, is we would like to change the definition to add that they must pay rent to a building owner. Why that? What we're trying to do is create a distinction between multifamily buildings and condominium buildings. What we're finding in this real cruel world that we've got, condominium owners are like, I don't know, we've sent out letters and they've gone to some individual condo owners and they're calling us and like, my unit's like 1,000 square feet. It's not covered. We feel like, most condo owners, they can't be held legally responsible for other owners in the same building. It's very difficult to work with a whole bunch of owners, as multifamily people can certainly attest to. Just working with tenants is hard enough. There are condo associations, but those mostly work on the common areas, and they have various rules and regulations, and it's kind of hard to identify those associations. So putting this pay rent to a building owner provision sort of backs it out and says condo buildings are really not going to be covered in this standard. The other reason we feel that this is fair is because the standard is mostly supposed to address commercial buildings, and condominiums, multifamily buildings are a commercial building, even though they're residential, because the building owner is sort of in the business of providing residential space. For condominiums, it's a little bit different. And you're saying that Washington covers condos. They don't cover the individual condominium units. What they cover are the common areas in condominiums. And there aren't even that many common areas. it still would be considered a multifamily building. It's a subset of a multifamily, I would think. And we would require common areas to be over 35,000 square feet. There's not that many of them in Washington State, and Oregon tends to have smaller buildings. We think it's going to be even more rare here, but we still can cover common areas in condominiums. So this is our proposal. Certainly want to hear your pros and cons about that. Next slide. So the other thing that we noticed, that pretty much takes care of the special tier 2 changes that we would like to make. And when I say special tier 2, those are the tier 2 buildings that 35,000 square feet and above and explicitly called out in the standard definitions. And you can see it here, it's under tier 2 building A. This is how our definitions stand right now in Oregon Standard 100. There's the tier 1 building definition and then tier 2 building definition that has part A, which is sort of like the special, what I'm calling the special buildings, and tier 2B, which is what I'm calling, or going to call, the regular buildings. And then there's this last statement in here about tier 2 building does not include a covered commercial building that is classified as a tier 1 building. So when I talk about having a logical conflict, let's just consider a 40,000 square foot hospital and work through these definitions. We look at tier 1, it's non-residential, it exceeds 35,000 square feet. Oh, a hospital must be a tier 1 building. Then we look at tier 2 building definition A, and we see, oh, it's a hospital and it exceeds 35,000 square feet. Therefore, it's tier 2. Tier 2B still keeps us with that hospital being a tier 2 building. Doesn't change that. And then there's that statement, a tier 2 building does not include a covered commercial building that is classified as a tier 1 building. But we've classified it also as tier 1. So which is it? So that's kind of a weird problem. And second example I have is a 25,000 square foot hospital. It's below the 35,000 square foot threshold, so it's not a tier 1 building. It's below the tier 2 building 35,000 square foot threshold, so it's not one of those special category hospitals. It's between 20,000 and 35,000 square feet, and it is non-residential. So is it still a tier 2 building, or is it not covered? It's not explicit. So next slide. So what did we intend? Well, clearly when we look at, we've always shown that diagram that I showed with the 2 buildings, that seems to indicate that, you know, if it's below a certain threshold, it's a hospital or any of those special tier 2 buildings should not be covered. Let's see, going back to the legislative intent, what do we have to hang this on? During one of the committee meetings in the Senate, a statement was made and then it was actually written out into a Q&A that indicated, it has the very specific words excluding and excluded, which tells us that, you know, a special tier 2 building has to be 35,000 square feet or more. If it's below that, it's not tier 1, it's not covered, etc. So that gives us exclusion cover to make sure, you know, that that really was the intent, and we feel that it was. Next slide. So that leads us to creating some new definitions. And in order to clarify or to simplify the wording in our updated definitions, which you'll see in a minute, I created 3 new definitions. I can just do that, you know, I can if you let me. So we have building gross floor area, regular gross floor area, and special gross floor area. Before we just had a gross floor area, but we didn't have any particular categories. Well, here, let's just go straight to regular. That would be hotel, motel, and non-residential, which we definitely called out before. And then special gross floor area is for all of those special use types, multifamily, hospital, school, university, dormitory were the original, and of course the additional ones that we would like to add: prison, barracks, residential care, and senior care. And of course, we're always excluding the parking garage, so never forget to exclude your parking garage. So we have these two regular and special gross floor areas, and then the building gross floor area is the sum of those two. Next slide. So keeping those two definitions or three definitions in mind, we come to a new definition for Tier 1 and a new definition for Tier 2. So, so the logical inconsistencies that we had are cleared up by the highlighted text, the text that's highlighted in turquoise, and I hope nobody's colorblind and can't see that that's turquoise, but the clause that says in Tier 1 that does not meet any Tier 2 building definition says, hey, if it's Tier 2, it's not Tier 1, and that gets rid of some of our conundrum there. And then in the Tier 2 building definition, now I want to let you know there's a part B and C coming, but right now we're just going through part A. We're calling out what I have in parentheses just for colloquial use, I guess. It's not I guess not an official definition. The regular Tier 2 building has, is between 20,000 and 35,000 square feet, and is not a special Tier 2 building, as we'll see when we get to that part. So the other thing that's important in this definition is we're calling out a Tier 2 building under ownership, and I didn't highlight that in the Tier 1, but also in Tier 1 under ownership by a sole individual or entity. That also is sort of some non-condominium language. So we've got that in there as well. Not that I'm against condominiums. All right, next slide. So that takes us to our next section. I just handled special Tier 2. I handled, the general tier determination for a regular old building. But what about mixed use buildings? And what do I mean when I talk about a mixed use building? It would be a building that would have maybe multifamily on the top floors and retail on the bottom floors, or any combination. We especially get into trouble when one of those quote unquote special Tier 2 types of buildings is included in a mixed use building. And since multifamily is one of those special uses, we do run into mixed use buildings a lot. Historically, there used to be a lot of mixed use buildings. It's come back into favor a lot recently. We had a lot of years where zoning precluded having a lot of mixed use buildings, but there's a lot of them still around and a lot of them now being built. So, so what do you do if you have some multifamily in a building, some retail, some office, some whatever? How do we assign that building to a tier? There really isn't much any language in the standard on how to do it. The only thing we had maybe was that phrase at the end of the Tier 2 definition, where Tier 2 building doesn't include a building that's classified as Tier 1. But honestly, I didn't know what that meant. It just seemed confusing to me, put me into that infinite loop of what is this building? And I wondered maybe should it have said Tier 1 building doesn't include a building classified as a Tier 2 building? Was it just written wrong? I don't know. What was the intent of that? We think it was included so that you could have a Tier 1 status for a mixed use building. That's our guess. If anybody who was working on this stuff at the time knows where that came from or has a better idea than what we do, that would be really helpful. But next slide. What was the legislative intent? First of all, we know in HB 3409 explicitly says they seek to maximize reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from buildings. And we're all on board with that. And HB 3409 also laid out these special tier 2 categories so they don't have to meet an energy target. So, you know, it's like we want to save energy, but not necessarily from these buildings, at least not yet. So there's no mention of mixed use buildings anywhere that I could find. So as I said on the previous slide, we here at ODO conclude that the intention was to allow mixed-use buildings to retain some kind of tier 1 status if they qualify for that, but how do we qualify them? What do we specify for that? So the next slide. There are, so, you know, 50%, that's always a good number. Do we have anything to hang a 50% threshold on? When we look at the rest of the standard, the 50% threshold is used in various places for exemptions for manufacturing or industrial buildings, for non-target buildings that are at least 50%. There's a threshold used there. For exemptions based on vacancy in the last 12 months. So that this 50% threshold is used, and, you know, barring anything else, we feel like that would be a good determinant for trying to classify a mixed use building. So what we're thinking is that a mixed use building with special gross floor area of at least 50% of the building gross floor area, sort of the total gross floor area, would be tier 2, but it would be tier 1 if it's below 50% at that special use. So if a multifamily building, if more than half of it is multifamily, it would be tier 2, but if less than half of it, it would be tier 1. Next slide. So here is the definition language. So we have the tier 2 building definition, part A. So this special definition comes into part B, and there will be a part C, so just wait. So the special tier 2 building with building gross floor area of at least 35,000 square feet, which was part of the original language. And what we're adding is that an either special gross floor area that equals or exceeds regular gross floor area, that is our 50% threshold right there. So that's saying just what I said on the slide before. And I would love to be able to stop there, but it's a little bit more complicated. And so we have this extra language here, and I'll explain that on our next slide. So this is a graph that we're using to help determine mixed use tier, to visualize it. It might not work for you, but I'm an engineer, it's working for me. So on the horizontal axis, we have the regular gross floor area. So that would be for any building, the sum of its hotel, motel, and non-residential area along that horizontal axis. On the vertical axis, we are putting the special gross floor area. And so the special gross floor area is any floor area for a building that's being used as a hospital, as a multifamily, as a, you know, if we change our definition, as a prison, all of those categories that are explicitly named. So the 50% threshold that I was talking about, you can see there's a line, it goes from the top right hand corner and it almost goes all the way down to the bottom left corners from 0, 0 to, I think I'm going to 250,000. So that's our 50% line. Above that line, we're going to assume that that will be a tier 2 building. Below that line, it will be some kind of tier 1 building, depending on its regular gross floor area. If it's above 200,000 square feet of hotel, motel, and non-residential, it has, it's a tier 1 building and its compliance date is in 2028, I think. And then the other 2 sections of tier 2 buildings. And then there's a sort of a lighter green section from 20,000 to 35,000. There's sort of a, what did you call that kind of trapezoid or something sitting there? It's light green if you're not colorblind. And that is the sort of regular tier 2 is what I'm calling it, the regular tier 2 category of a building with hotel, motel, and non-residential area between 20,000 and 35,000 square feet. But the total floor area, the building gross floor area, is not shown on here. It would be the sum of the special gross floor area and the regular gross floor area. And why do we care about that? Because when we go back to the original tier 2 special definition, it's talking about the building gross floor area. And it says the building gross floor area of any of these special tier 2 buildings must be at least 35,000 square feet. So that's not just, you know, the hotel, motel, non-residential. It's not just the special uses. It's the entire building, of course, not including the parking garage. So that line is actually shown. So it starts on the vertical axis at 35,000 and 0. And then it progresses and it would stop at 35,000 on the horizontal axis and 0 on the vertical axis. But we run in to the special tier 2 category. So you know how we've got these two lines, one big one that cuts across the entire thing, and then this little one in the bottom left corner. Those are the two lines that define our tier 2 status. And they don't meet in a convenient place. They don't just meet on the corner at 20,000 and 20,000. They meet at 20,000 and 15,000, if that makes sense to you. So if you go back a slide, there's a whole bunch of language there that's highlighted in yellow. Well, actually, even before that, it says if regular gross floor area is at least 20,000 square feet, or special gross floor area of at least 15,000 square feet if regular gross floor area is less than 20,000 square feet. So that is the bit more complicated than I'm talking about. It's because those two lines don't match up. And we thought I had more complicated ways of dealing with this, but we went with this simple, we've got two lines, let's just spell it out. So that's where we're coming from on a mixed use building determining tier. So I hope that that's clear. It certainly used a lot of words to describe it, but if you have questions, I'm happy to go through it more. So next slide. Where does that leave us? So that takes care of how we want to define the tiers of mixed use buildings, but grouped buildings, we're still getting we've been getting a lot of questions about, you know, grouped buildings and what is in the standard and, you know, what all should we mean? First of all, how do we assign a tier to buildings that are in groups? And that's important, you know, for the individual buildings. It's also important for the group in terms of when is it supposed to comply with the standard. And then some questions about what kinds of buildings can be grouped. We want to allow, we want to make it explicitly clear that groups can include tier 1 buildings or it could be just a set of tier 2 buildings or a bunch of not covered buildings that get stuck in this group because they share metering with the other buildings in the group and they can't be separated out. Obviously, if you can separate out a building, we don't want to hear about it if it's not covered, but if it can't be separated out, then it just has to be included in the reporting. The other thing is we want to be able to specify the compliance date, and we think the best way to do that is to base compliance date for any group on the tier and the size of the largest building. So it might be a tier 1 building over 200,000 square feet, in which case their compliance date would be July 1st, 2028, or it might be smaller and therefore its compliance date would be different. But that's how we want to call that out. And then we would like to change some of the requirements for grouped buildings to encourage reporting as groups without any penalties. So I will explain what that means on the next couple slides. Let's see. So I would like to update the definition for grouped buildings. I should say I, but it's really we. It's not just me. I don't have that kind of power. So we would like to update the definition of group buildings. First of all, it started out, it just said buildings that comply at the connected or campus level. We wanted to change that to the set of tier 1 and or tier 2 buildings. And it did have this along with any connected buildings that are not covered in there already. So that's nice. So that just, what I've highlighted in yellow is setting out that group buildings can include tier 1, tier 2, and not covered buildings. So we're also trying to add this, the original definition was that comply at the connected or campus level. And those two definitions, I don't call them out here, but those really meant that connected meant that they shared metering, and campus level generally meant that they were on the same district heating or cooling system or some other power sharing system. So calling them out to be at the complex level allows, if you look at the definition of complex at the bottom there, it's a group of individual or connected buildings on contiguous property. So that allows them to not just be connected through metering, they might share metering, but they don't have to. But then we've also added this extra little phrase here. They comply at the complex level and have a single shared primary function. And the reason for that is because, as we'll show in a minute, we plan to try to extend special tier 2 status to other buildings in a group with a special tier 2 building. And if someone just happened to have a bunch of buildings on the same contiguous property that didn't share metering, but one of them was a tier 2, we don't think that the tier 2 status should get extended to buildings that just happen to be there but aren't part of the whole thing. That's very descriptive, right? So I'll explain that. Hopefully that'll be clear as I go on. So let's go to the next slide. Oh, I should say one thing about that slide before we go to this slide, is that buildings that share metering have to comply as a group, right? So what we're trying to do is allow buildings that don't share metering to also submit group building applications. So that's kind of what we're trying to get at for this. Next slide. So this hospital definition, it's actually a pretty key definition, and maybe it's just inadvertent, but this hospital definition is what we're sort of hanging extended tier 2 status on, which you don't know what maybe I mean by that, but you will. So the definition of hospital, there's a bunch of language at the beginning, and then the bolded part of it, originally, and people who manage hospitals, please don't freak out. It's going to be okay. We've got your back. The definition of hospital originally accounted for building activity types owned by the hospital that are in that hospital complex. And that could include offices, medical offices, food service, retail, whatever was on that hospital complex, within that hospital building complex. So you see that word complex there too. So the reason this definition came about, this is sitting in our table 7-4. This is a definition we pulled over, I believe, from Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And the reason they have this accounting for building activity types owned by the hospital is because I think when hospitals report, so many of them have interconnected metering through all their buildings that most of the hospitals reporting included all of these other spaces. So they just wrapped it all into one category, called it hospital, and it could mean, you know, a lot of things, which is great. I fully support that and I understand it. And I will say that our energy use intensity target is probably also based on the same kind of data that includes non-strictly, not hospital buildings, but other spaces as well. And so that target, you know, if we were to apply that target to just a hospital building, it's probably low. people who manage hospital complexes are telling us it's low for the entire complex. So we recognize that. Let's go to the next slide. So, oh, wait, let's not go to the next slide. So I am proposing that we strike out that the definition of hospital does not account for these activity types. So I'm taking that away here. And the reason I keep saying it's a we are taking it away, or we'd like to take it away, because why exactly? Because we would like to get as much individual building data as we can. We would like to encourage the reporting of individual building data. We would like to be able to say what a hospital building uses, what a medical office uses, all of these things, and break it out as much as we can. And we're trying to encourage that. I also want to call out that this definition uses the word complex, which is one of the things that inspired us to put a complex into the group building definition, because what this says is a hospital building complex doesn't have to have shared metering. It can be just a bunch of individual buildings. So I hope you're starting to see how this stuff all hangs together. So now we can go to the next slide. So I've sort of taken away that definition of other types of buildings under the hospital definition, but I would like to explicitly extend tier 2 status to buildings that are in a group with a tier 2 building. So remember that we went back and adjusted the grouped buildings definition so that it can include buildings that don't share metering, but are on the same complex, under the same ownership, on contiguous property, and have the same primary function. So if you happen to have an extended tier 2 building, one of the special tier 2 buildings in a group, and even if they're not sharing metering, you can submit it as a group. And if you happen to have a tier 1 building, say you have a hospital in a group, and you also have some medical office buildings that, if they were submitting alone, would probably be a tier 1 building on their own and have to comply with standards. But since we would like to allow them to be submitted as a group with the special tier 2 building as part of this hospital complex, we can officially, explicitly extend a tier 2 status and not just sort of backdoor it the way we have been. So I've been talking about hospitals, but notice I don't just say hospital in this definition. I say tier 2 because we would also like to extend this to other types of tier 2 buildings. We don't think it's going to be as big a deal. We think most, not all, but most other types of special tier 2 buildings are not going to be in a set or in a complex with other, non-special tier 2 buildings. Case in point, a university. A university building could be anything, so if it's in a university, it's a university building. And so I don't think we're going to see any non-university buildings in there. So it's already kind of got that special tier 2 status. Multifamily buildings tend to be grouped with other multifamily buildings and complexes if they don't share the same primary function. If it's a multifamily building and some owner just happens to own it, and on the same lot or next door, they also own a retail building. Those don't share the same primary function, so those wouldn't be grouped, and that other building might not get that extended status. But if it was a retail building supporting the multifamily or supporting whatever use it was, it's kind of a judgment call there, but sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's a little less clear, but I think spelling it out here is better. Hope I've explained that. Let's go to the next slide. So on a practical level, what does this mean? If you have a building on a campus and you think it should have tier 2 status extended to it, then it has to, first of all, be submitted as part of a group building application. Otherwise, we won't know that it's supposed to be in a group with this other building. And the special tier 2 building in the group, there's a requirement, remember, that it has to be at least 35,000 square feet. So just because you have a multifamily building that's 20,000 square feet, that's not a special tier 2 building, and grouping your buildings won't get you special tier 2 for any of the buildings unless you have an actual special tier 2 building. Only tier 1 buildings in the group can have this extended tier 2 status. If you have a building in the group that's not covered, or a building that's tier 2 under some other thing, it's already tier 2, but a not covered building will remain not covered. It's not going to change. It's just the tier 1 buildings that can have a little, get a little break. Let's see. And I just want to also call out again that single shared primary function. So we are trying to, keep the extension of tier 2 status for buildings that are a set that work together with a single shared primary function. It's not just some building that it would be there no matter what. It's a building that's there because the first building was there, and they're all working together. So next slide. We want to talk about, do we think we're meeting the intention? The whole thing about these tier 2 buildings, it's very explicitly said in HB 3409 that tier 2 buildings are set up with a stated goal of collecting energy data to evaluate tier 2 buildings. Expanding those to the definition to buildings without shared metering. The reason we want to do that is because to group buildings, we want to make sure there's not a penalty for grouping buildings and eliminating some paperwork. If it was just if you were only able to group buildings that shared metering, that would be sort of a penalty for buildings or complexes, like certainly under that hospital definition, that wanted to share or extend their tier 2 status. So we don't want to have any kind of penalty for that. And then we would like to open this up also because we don't want people to hide their data and pretend, I'm not saying anyone would do this, but we don't want complexes to pretend that they have shared metering and not share energy data down to the building level if they have it. So we don't, that's the important thing, is the building level data for us to be able to break it down as much as possible. And I think that meets the intention to collect energy data to evaluate these buildings. Next slide. So the final category I would like to talk about are tier 2 exemptions. So HB 3409 was the legislation that supported the Oregon Building Performance Standard, and there are sections 14 and 15 within that standard that explicitly talk about tier 2 buildings. And nowhere in that section do they mention exemptions at all. They don't use the word at all, but they also don't rule them out, and they don't say you can't have them. So, maybe we're reading too much into it. You can make the call. What it does say is that eligible building owners must provide data to enable the department to establish a benchmark for tier 2 buildings, paraphrasing there. So, we're explicit about that. So tier 2 buildings, they have to submit their benchmarking information. They have to figure out their energy target and tell us how much energy they're using. They don't need to meet that target. They don't need to submit EMP or O&M forms. They don't need to do audits. They don't need to implement energy efficiency measures. So next slide. So HB 3409 didn't have any tier 2 exemptions in it. And I think sort of we took that literally when we were putting up together Oregon Standard 100 and explicitly dropped sections describing tier 2 exemptions. I should note that those exemptions were left in the Washington Clean Building Performance Standard. So they do have exemptions for tier 2 buildings there. And not only that, but in Oregon Standard 100, every time an exemption is mentioned, it's written in that it should be for tier 1 buildings. So I don't know, that's how it was put together. Next slide. So what do we know about exemptions? And I think this is the funniest thing ever, because I've always loved hazelnuts or filberts, and to have them come up here was just funny. So there was a Senate Energy and Environmental Committee meeting, and a question was posed about filbert and hazelnut processors. Apparently they're not usually explicitly on farmland or sitting on farmland. They're separate from farmland. And I guess the way that the bill was written initially left out, or kept in some provision that things had to be on actual quote unquote farmland, but then they fixed it. So the answer to that question, can filbert or hazelnut processors get an exemption, an agricultural exemption? And the answer was yes, they should be eligible for exemptions. And, we're sort of holding a lot of faith in what was not said. They didn't say that only filbert processors that meet tier 1 or of any particular size would get an exemption. They said filbert processors are eligible for an exemption. So to me, and to our group, that sets the expectation that all agricultural buildings would be eligible for exemptions, regardless of their size, regardless of what tier they fell into. Next slide. So the other thing that was important that HB 3409, which I called out, is that they really wanted us to report information about energy use of these tier 2 buildings. And when we think about the exemptions that tier 1 buildings get, and we can go through and think, well, if tier 2 buildings aren't exempt and they still give us their energy data, how useful is that? So for a low occupancy, high vacancy building, or a building with a lack of conditioned space, which are 3 of the exemptions that tier 1 buildings get, if a tier 2 building had these same conditions, their energy use is not going to be representative. It's probably low. And it's not, if we were to use these buildings when we were determining, say, an energy target, that energy target's going to be low and not representative. So I'm a little leery about doing that. The other thing for manufacturing and industrial use and agricultural use, this program is not set up to address those types of buildings. And energy data for those types of buildings is not needed. We don't intend to set future targets for industrial or agricultural buildings. That's just not part of the plan as far as I can see. The other exemption that tier 1 buildings are allowed is for financial hardship. And if a building is under financial hardship, a tier 2 building is under financial hardship, are they likely to have normal energy use? Or are they, trying to cut costs where they can, or turning things off? So once again, I don't think that's going to be helpful energy data. And also, we're extending grace to tier 1 buildings that have financial hardship. And, arguably, tier 1 buildings are larger and worth more and therefore have more value. And tier 2 buildings are smaller and, people have fewer resources with smaller buildings, theoretically. I guess it sort of lends us the idea that grace should be extended no matter the building tier. So next slide. So for all of those reasons, for the filbert argument, and for all of the reasons we don't even feel like collecting tier 2 building data is useful if they would qualify for the same exemptions as tier 1 buildings, we just don't see any reason to not allow tier 2 buildings to get these exemptions. And so, we have identified a whole bunch of places in the standard to change the language that allows it. A lot of it is just changing it to tier 1 or tier 2 building, various amendments being made throughout, which I'm not going to subject you to looking through all of that. But we've figured out everywhere where we think that needs to be changed. Next slide. So, in summary, I'm finally done. Summary of our proposed updates. As I said, I'll just go through them quickly. We would like to extend special tier 2 status, and hopefully you understand what I mean by that, by adding it to, or explicitly calling out prisons, barracks, residential care, and senior care facilities. We would like to clear up the definition of building tiers to more explicitly set out tier 1 and tier 2 requirements. We would also like to clear up that definition to as it applies to mixed use buildings. So that's tier 2 building definition part B, which is that 50% threshold in most cases with that little extra blip at lower building sizes. We would also like to be more explicit about what's allowed for grouped building applications, whether or not they can share metering. We don't think they need to. And how let's call out the extension of tier 2 status for group buildings that include a special tier 2 building. And also we would like to allow tier 2 building exemptions. So those are the major, I don't know how major they are. Those are the changes, the updates that we would like to make to the Oregon Building Performance Standard. We very much welcome your input. If you are on the stakeholder panel, I would love to hear any history that might be pertinent that we didn't catch, any arguments or conversations you remember, or your impressions even of that. And, call us out on any little details, any little wording changes. So that is it. I think we can address some questions now. So who can bring up a question?
Thanks, Lisa. I know there's been a few questions in the chat and some active responses there. I think there are a couple outstanding questions in there too. And other folks feel free to add in here too, but I do see one from Grace Callahan about changing the definition regarding paying rent, and how would that affect low-income housing where tenants don't pay rent?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I'll have to think that through, and I appreciate having that brought to our attention.
And then there was another question from Adam H. about commercial condos. What about commercial condos?
Yeah, and I think I had that. There was a provision back a few slides. There was a provision in the tier 1 and tier 2 definitions that is explicitly there to try to address commercial condos and sort of exempt those in the same way as we're exempting residential condominiums. No, keep going back. Sorry, there it is. A building under ownership by a sole individual or entity. That's in the definition. I think we're adding it to the definition of tier 1 and tier 2. And that's kind of where we stand. You can disagree with that if you want to, but we are trying to, it's just so hard. We've gotten a few of these commercial buildings that have multiple owners, and it's not just, a bunch of people grouping together and owning the whole building, but they own different parts of the building. And maybe I can finesse this a little bit more. I would appreciate anybody wanting to wordsmith this some more to make that clearer. or if you think it is clear, let me know. Or if you don't even agree that we should be letting these individual commercial condominiums kind of off the hook, want to hear that. So more questions?
Great, thanks, Lisa. I do see another question from Kevin Fish, and I'll just read it, Kevin. But if there's any more you want to add in there to clarify anything, feel free to go ahead. But I guess he has two questions. First, on special tier 2, since prisons are being considered special tier 2, does extended tier 2 status apply to buildings on the prison campus that don't house adults in custody, but whose function is part of the prison mission, such that no building would be regarded as tier 1 regardless of size?
Yes. Well stated, and yes.
Yes.
Kind of like a hospital.
Clear answer there. Yep. And then the second question is, can a medical center and or university through which one or more public streets run still be considered contiguous property and get the extended tier 2 status, such that no building with a single primary campus function would be considered tier 1?
It depends. You know, if they share metering, yeah, I guess, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to look at it. It's a case by case thing on some level. But I think so. But you know, if they can separate it out and submit as 2 groups, maybe, I don't know. We'll just have to see it. I don't think having I mean, we do say contiguous, but I don't know. Anyone else have more wisdom than me?
Well, I think in the university case, those would always be tier 2 because of just the definition of the university building.
Yeah.
Regardless of it, whether or not it has a street running through it and contiguous property.
Yeah. I don't know. There's always these special cases, and geez, you know, we're doing our best to try and make it work.
Yeah, a couple comments in there just about thanks for all the hard work, that these changes seem to be really thought out, and that's definitely what we're trying to do here, and kudos to Lisa for doing a lot of the heavy lifting. There's a question from Adam about, can Lisa talk more about grouping buildings that don't share metering and how that would provide more individual building data?
Well, what I want to do is, it doesn't necessarily provide more individual building data. One of the things is, like, if you group your buildings, that's like, if you have like 5 buildings and we have to look at 5 applications, that's work for us. But it's more, you know, we're here to do it, we're getting paid to do it, but it's a lot of work for building owners too. So to be able to submit data as a group, we want to encourage that, to make it easier on building owners, for one. It doesn't necessarily make people submit their energy use data individually, but we would like them to. You will see when the target tool comes out, after we've hashed all this stuff out, you will see that for grouped buildings, each building has to have its own line and it gets its own individual target, and then it's tallied up into a group target. So it needs to be declared individually on the target definitions. And then we would also, to the extent possible, like the energy use to be submitted, you know, through Energy Start Portfolio Manager on a building by building basis, like I said, as possible. So just changing the grouped definition doesn't do that, but we are trying to like encourage that, and we wanted to try to make that more possible. And I guess that if people had to have group or shared metering in order to be a group, and in order to get a special tier 2 status for any of their buildings extended to them, we didn't want to discourage that reporting of individual data as they have it. I hope that makes sense. I mean, it's not a perfect world, so, but we're trying to make it, trying to get more data. I love data. I want it. More questions? Anything we haven't covered?
I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat that we haven't addressed, but if there are any, we just got a couple more. There we go. We got a question from Kevin about when will the application window for early compliance incentives open? We are targeting that to open sometime. We were initially thinking before the end of September. It looks like it's going to take a couple more weeks to just get all the internal reviews and everything final, but now we're targeting mid-October for that first opportunity announcement to come out for what we're calling the ECAP program, the Early Compliance Action and Planning program. And then there's a question from Rachel that CCC has some mixed use buildings that are condoed in quotes for purposes of financing. For example, 50% of a building is commercial and owned under New Market Tax Credit Partnership, and 50% is multifamily residential owned under LIHTC partnership. CCC is the general partner of both partnerships. Would such ownership structures be exempted from BPS because it is two entities?
Gosh.
That's a complex one.
You're going to make us look up LLC.
Yeah.
I hope not. I mean, I would like not to have those exempted. That's not our intention. So, we're going to look at things with a skeptical eye, and maybe I just hope people don't come at us legally for anything, But if you can think of a way to improve our wording here, that would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And Jennifer put a note in there too that panelists are welcome to unmute yourself now. I think we're at we've still got 20 minutes left on the scheduled meeting, and if we want to just voice any questions directly, that's definitely okay too, if there's anything folks just want to have a discussion about.
I guess I'm getting, except for a few, obvious helpful comments. It seems like people are okay with this stuff. I don't know, thumbs up, thumbs down.
I'd like to discuss the condo part further because when we met as a panel at the beginning, we discussed not following Washington's direction on that because of the difficulties they're having with it.
Right. Well, we can discuss that some more. I'm not quite sure what you mean. We have spoken with Washington about how they're running it and what problems they're having. They are exempting individual condos and just going after the common areas, going after, making common area condos comply.
Yeah, so what we're finding up in, say, like Seattle, we have to meet both the city and the state for compliance, because the city has their own compliance as well.
Sure.
So setting up Energy Star, we can't set up Energy Star for one way and then switch it to the other way. We only can do it one way. So how are we going to manage that?
Well, this is
the state of Washington struggling with that right now.
Right, but I don't know how that applies to Oregon.
But it's going to be the same way. If you're going to separate out, the city of Portland is potentially looking at expanding and doing similar legal work as Seattle did.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know. I mean, I just don't. It's for the common areas, and it's a multifamily.
And then
how many kids have a common area of 35,000 square feet or above?
We are, well, I don't know about Oregon, but in the city of Seattle, we're over probably several hundred.
That's a lot of common area.
Yeah. So any tower that's over, say, like 9 feet is potentially vulnerable to this.
9 feet? What do you mean?
I mean, 9 stories. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
All right. How many 9-story? Oh, I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's certainly something to think about.
So the other problem that we're having up here is we have to, figure out their common area. Most of the buildings don't have building plans to figure out what the actual common area is. So how are we going to define how that's going to be measured?
Yeah, we don't have that. And as I said, I'm thinking that most of these buildings aren't going to be covered anyway. So,
Okay.
and
It's,
it's case by case basis, I guess.
yeah, it just seems to be a struggle up here trying to separate out all this and to get that information over to the state.
I guess I think that we just sort of want to keep condo buildings out of it. Even, I obviously if there's some huge condo building that has a lot of common space, we don't want to leave them out, but for anything that doesn't, it's just like not going to be
Yeah,
our problem.
yeah. We're finding that a lot of the condos are like way off from their EUI targets up here.
Mm. Well, yeah.
So it would be good to capture these, 9-story taller buildings.
Well, I don't even know, I don't think we have a common area target even set up. We have it for multifamily, but it's not specifically for common areas, which are going to be different from the rest. And
Yeah.
it is very complicated. We all
Yes,
know that
exactly.
multifamily buildings are very complicated. I'm not downplaying that by any means. I'm trying to sidestep it, which, maybe isn't fair, but I hear you. Thanks. Yeah.
Earlier in the chat, Kathleen had a question, and I potentially wrongfully typed in that we were thinking of not covering residential condominiums.
Right.
Is that still correct?
Well, it's not that we're thinking of not covering them. It's the way we're writing the standard is they would not be covered. I guess maybe I'm
Okay,
semantically
yes.
changing things, but yeah, that's kind of it, is like, it's because, if we put it under sole ownership, that sole ownership clause here, where you can see it in the tier 2 building, and we do it also in the multifamily definition, a couple places. It is to sort of let them out because it's just legally a mess, and practically, as Michael pointed out, a mess. Very difficult. And we have enough just to do what we're doing now. We can always address these later.
But maybe just to clarify though, I think under the current proposed changes, if the common areas of the condos are greater than the size thresholds, then that common area would still be a covered building.
Yeah.
Is that right, Lisa?
And I've pointed that out, and I've also pointed out that we don't think there's going to be that many common areas that are that
Yeah.
big. And Michael rightly pointed out how hard it is to figure out common area sizes, et cetera. So, I hear it. It's all complicated.
Yeah.
But we're trying to keep it simpler and leave a bunch of this out. So, smaller condominium buildings are just not going to be part of it. And if they're very large, they might be still. More questions? We're here. We have 12 more minutes if you want to.
Can I follow up on that last comment?
Sure.
This is Kathleen Belkite from Energy Trust.
Thanks.
So if you're considering them not covered, if they don't have to apply for exemptions, then what is
Right.
the process that they're going through to calculate the common area square footage? If they don't have to apply for an exemption, is it just assumed that they're not covered? Do they actually have to submit something that proves their common area is under 35,000 square feet?
We don't have anything about that yet. You're certainly making me think about it. We could certainly come up with some estimated, when you think about it, there's hallways, there's stairwells, there's laundry rooms, there's, we could come up with some estimated percentage. And if a condo building was above a certain size, and we could certainly come up with something.
Well, I guess, I'm not necessarily suggesting that because that sounds like it's a lot of work, but I guess how are people feeling confident and comfortable that they're not covered, I guess would be my question maybe.
Yeah. So like up here, we're we're having to basically, if they get a notice, that we would have to submit to them, to the state, saying that, you know, they're smaller than that size. That's all. They just need somebody, an energy person, to say that.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
Is that something that we can do down here?
Maybe. I mean, we could, I don't know. I mean, we haven't done it yet. Certainly have to think about it. We're not going to commit to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that process is probably similar to like any other building that's maybe kind of right on a threshold of being covered or not, or between one of the like compliance dates or not, where, you know, we think we have an idea of the total square footage, but if a building owner, for example, logs into our property inventory list and revises what the actual square footage is, then we can review that and accept it or ask more questions to document that square footage.
And I think, you know, we've gotten questions and we've gotten input from condo owners. A lot of our letters are going to the individual condo owners, as I mentioned before. And, you know, they just throw up their hands at it. They're not equipped to do this. And then it just, you know, it's like then they have to go to the condo association and who's in charge of the common areas. It's like, it just gets so complicated so quickly.
Yeah.
You know, and to even have them fill out something like that would be a little bit nuts, you know?
Well,
I mean, who's responsible for filling it out?
it would be the association itself.
Right, but how do we even get a hold of the association?
Yeah, that's the struggle that we're having up here is the notices go out similar, you know, to either the property manager, if they were able to figure out who is the property association manager, or it's going to the ownerships.
But I guess what I hear from you is that you agree with us trying to sidestep this as much as we can.
Yeah, I'd rather say put the whole building in as a whole, including all the living spaces, and treat it like an apartment, or totally exclude them.
Well, if we were to take the common area and divide it up among the number of units and say, you know, each unit has so much area added to it.
Yeah, then you're talking about bylaws at that point. Because they're going to go back and say, well, legally my property is only this.
Well, I'm just saying none
Yeah,
of them qualify is where it is. I mean,
Yeah.
how many 35,000 square foot condominiums are there? Just an individual condominium unit. I mean,
Yeah, when you have a developer first build one, if it doesn't sell out completely, he owns a large portion of those condos until they're completely sold.
right. I just don't think we need to get that far
Yeah.
in. So
That's what I'm thinking. It's like treat it as an apartment and just say the building as a whole needs to be treated, or just totally excluded, I think would be the easier way.
yeah, maybe.
It's just, I recognize that the towers here that we're dealing with are definitely not meeting their, you know, close to their targets at all.
Well, we do have this, a building under ownership by a sole individual or entity.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of lets out any condo building, including its common area.
Well, an entity would be the association.
Well, the association doesn't own the building. The association manages the building,
Manages the common areas.
but it doesn't own the common areas.
Who owns it though?
I don't know.
It depends on the bylaw of each independent condo.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Yeah. And then we got,
I'm not a real estate law
I know
expert.
that's the part that's struggling here. We have the same situation with the associations and co-ops, and you know,
Well,
it's just
anyway,
all how all these are built.
I just don't think it's going to be a big deal here. And
Okay.
I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. So anybody have anything that has nothing to do with condos? Any questions? We've beaten that one to death, right?
There's a question about the target finder tool.
Ah,
And how close is it to being released as a draft? And will the committees get a chance to test it out and provide feedback?
We hadn't planned on having the committee. We had already given an earlier version out to various people to test, and we have tested it extensively internally. And if these changes that we're proposing are good to go, then that finder is pretty much ready to go. A target tool, it's ready to go. I think we need to wait until we're asking for people to give feedback by October 3rd on these things. And if we don't get any pushback, which we're not, except for maybe this condo thing and a few odds and ends, sounds like that we could go ahead and release that tool first week of October. I just didn't want to release the tool without all of the one of the things the tool does is tells you what tier the building's in or the group is in or whatever. So I didn't want to release that tool without having all these tier definitions all nailed down. We have been testing it on actual buildings, so thank you, Kathleen.
Hey Lisa, this is Rachel. I'm just going to follow up on that a little bit because the reason for my question was really, I'm having a little bit of a hard time just following all of the kind of nuances and implications of all of these changes. And for me to give like real feedback to you about these changes, I need to understand how they impact my buildings. And I think without like a decision tree diagram or something that kind of lines this out, we're kind of seeing these changes for the first time, right? Today it was a lot of information. It's clearly you've thought it through really well, but it's a lot to process. And I think being able to apply it to our real life, to our buildings and our ownership structures and our the nuances and the things that we are familiar with our buildings would be really helpful for me as a committee member to give feedback to you about these definitions. And that's kind of where I'm getting with that.
We have posted this presentation on our website, and I really appreciate your taking, I mean, maybe not the explicit time, but you know how you're driving in the car and it takes a few days for things to percolate in your brain. I know that's how I work. So I would really, that's what we're trying to hurry up and get this done because, you know, we want to get it done. But so by October 3rd, which I guess is next Friday, we would love to hear your thoughts. And if you want to sit down or give me a call, we can talk through various example buildings that you have. I would be happy to do that. So just, send an email or get hold of me. Happy to do that if that helps, if you have time.
Okay.
But yeah, I do appreciate that I just threw a lot and it's so complicated. These definitions all sort of spin and, depend on each other. And so, yeah, the implications are kind of wild when you get into the weeds. So thanks for, it's just been a logical thing too, my brain is so tired right now. More questions? We have 2 minutes. Love to hear. Well, I do want to thank everybody so much because so many of you have provided so much help to the development of this program over a couple of years now. And just helping us to close the loop on this would be great. And then obviously, as the program moves forward, we really appreciate your support and your help and your input.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks everyone for logging in today and kind of listening through as we went through fairly detailed overview of the changes. Definitely welcome any additional feedback before October 3rd. We're hoping to finalize these things and reflect them in an updated version of the Oregon BPS standard up on our website. But before we do that, we want to make sure that we capture any concerns or any issues from our advisory committees. So definitely reach out through our email or any one of the team members if you have any questions or comments to provide feedback on this. And thanks, Lisa. Thanks everyone for logging in today.
Thanks.